We're going to be starting in verse 4. My sermon title this morning is Made to Matter. Made to Matter. Now, you probably noticed, and you're probably wondering, what in the world is wrong with Pastor? Last week we had a balance scale. This week we have Jenga. How many of you have ever played Jenga before? Oh, my goodness. Really? That's about 10% of us have played Jenga before. Jenga is both a fun and an extremely frustrating game. Amen? You don't find it frustrating? Yeah. It's a hugely frustrating game. Let me give you a little bit of the story of Jenga, since so few of us know exactly what it is. Jenga is a game that consists of 54 uniform, and when I say uniform, they're semi-uniform because they're made out of wooden blocks. They're stacked up in three. You take three pieces of these wooden blocks that look just like this. I won't tell you how much time I spent this morning trying to make sure that this looked just right, because I didn't have that there's a cardboard sleeve that goes with these that you stack it in and everything's perfect. My wife was laughing at my OCD as I was sitting there trying to get everything just right. And so I'm going to mess with myself. When I put this back, I won't be able to get it right. 54 wooden blocks just like this, stacked 18 high on their horizontal. See, I told you I'm going to mess with myself. On their horizontal plane. The game was originally created by a lady by the name of Leslie Scott. And it was developed in Ghana. It was a game that her family started playing when she was a kid. It was introduced to the public for the first time at the Harrods department store in London in 1982. Sold in North America for the first time in 1986. So to set up the game, this is the way it starts for those of you that never played. And the object of the game is to take one block from any level of the stack. And so you can feel out like there. See, for example, you go like this, and I'm going to play by myself here for a minute, because then, now you're not supposed to touch that like I just did, but it's going to mess up my illustration if I don't. You're supposed to pull the block out, and then you're supposed to begin setting it and filling up full tiers on the top. Now, you're supposed to keep doing this, and you can do this in any layer that's below the full layer. You don't have to start at the bottom. You don't have to start in the middle. You can pull one off of a side like that. And then you have to place it on top. And the object of the game is to continue to do this, continue to remove pieces until the loser pulls the wrong piece and the whole thing comes crashing down. One of the things that I've learned about Jenga is, in order for the whole to be the whole, every single piece is important. Now, that's a dangerous thing right there. If you do that to somebody, that's really mean. And that's why I always go right for the... you all know I'm not a super patient person. I don't like to sit there and torture myself with this game. So this is the reason why I hate this game. Because usually, this right here is where everything falls apart for me. Because now, after you pull it out, you have to put it back in there, and there's only one piece in there. Folks, you just witnessed history. I don't think I've ever done that before. But what happens is that now, all of a sudden, the next person has to safely remove a piece. Oh, goodness gracious. There we go. There's one that's loose. See, and that's why I say they're semi-uniform, because I will tell you this, that some of them are not quite identical to the other ones. And there's always one that you can find that's a little bit loose. But as you continue to remove this and remove pieces, it becomes unstable. Because the foundation of the building has begun to lose its strength. Because the pieces that support the foundation are missing. The record for the highest that a Jenga has ever, the known record that the highest that Jenga has ever gone is 40 complete stories with 2 blocks on the 41st. Now, right now, we are at 20 stories. Twice as tall as this. And that was actually done in 1985 by a gentleman by the name of Robert Grebler. He already had 2 blocks into the 41st story. And it's a fun thing to look at that and sit there, but the point that I want us to focus on this morning is what happens as pieces are removed from the foundation. As we continue to take pieces away from the base, and even pieces that sometimes we think are, oh, that one's loose, that one's not as important. But the more pieces that you take away, the more it starts rocking and rolling, and more that it loses its strength, the more it loses its ability to stand. The more it loses I got to tell you, I'm impressed with myself right now. But eventually, what happens is if you continue to remove pieces, that one I can't do. I was expecting this to fall a lot sooner than this, guys. All right, fine. The whole thing turns into a mess, doesn't it? And then the idea is you restack it and you do again. And I think that part of my OCD is I can't take that. So now I have to preach over top of it. So Jesus will work on me a little bit this morning while I'm preaching. But the idea is that each piece in that stack, in order for it to remain whole and stable, plays an essential part. Even some of the pieces that when we first start to take them out, they feel like they're a little bit loose and they're easy to remove. And sometimes we can think that, boy, that piece really isn't that important. But what you notice is as you start to take more pieces away, even some of those loose pieces would have been beneficial. Because then it starts, as you sit there and you watch it and it starts rocking back and forth, you think, boy, if that one piece was just in there, it would keep it from rocking so far. At least that's what I do anyhow. I don't know about you. Maybe you don't pay that much attention to it. I had a video I wanted to share with you this morning, but it didn't work out. A little over 2 years ago, actually, it's just almost exactly 2 years ago. As you all know, we were trying to sell our house in New York. We had a contract on the house, but the buyers were using an FHA loan, which if you're ever selling a house and somebody has an FHA loan, be prepared. You're going to have to jump through some hoops. On this property, there was an old barn and some acreage, and one of the things that we had to do in order for the sale of the property was we had to tear the old barn down and we had to remove the silo that was standing next to it. So I had a friend that lives in New York. He works in construction. He has his own equipment, and he and his partner, I hired them to come and dig a hole and knock the barn down and bury it. They also had to knock the silo down. Now, how many of you ever watched somebody knock a silo down? It's actually pretty interesting. Because the way that you take a silo down is you start knocking the blocks out at the base. And this is a concrete stave silo, and so they started working their way around, just knocking little by little, knocking the blocks out. You'd be surprised how long a silo will stay up with 2/3 of the blocks knocked out. But eventually it comes to a point of no return where there's so many blocks removed that it has to go down. And the whole thing collapses. And it's not that there's any one block that is more important than the other, but it's the combination of all the blocks working together that keep the silo up. If you've ever looked at concrete silos, if you've ever looked inside of one, you'll realize that the block walls aren't even that thick. Most of the blocks are between 3 and 4 inches thick. And yet they'll build silos that are 60, 70, 80 feet in the air. And what holds them together is the concrete staves or the depending on some of them are made out of metal and stuff now. The staves and the metal bands that keep them together. And just like Jenga, as you begin to take out pieces, at first the instability doesn't appear. But the more you take out, pretty soon you hear the silo groaning, or the Jenga tower starts to shift. And the next thing you know, the whole thing comes crashing down. I believe that in some ways, each of us is a little bit like a Jenga piece. Now, there's many ways that we're not. First of all, none of us are that square, and none of us are made out of wood. But when I say that, what I'm talking about is the significance, the part that we play in the whole. Sometimes we don't recognize the importance of the job that God has created us for. Sometimes we can look at ourselves in the mirror in a morning as we're preparing for work or we're getting ready for church, and we just look at ourselves and we're like, you know what? I'm just pretty ordinary. When you look around this room, I would say that all of us can probably say, you know what? I'm just pretty ordinary. And yet each of us has something special and unique, a job that God has created each and every one of us for. And this is what I know, is that as you start to pull us out of the pile and remove us. Now, what would have been really fun is if I had just started taking those out and setting them aside and saying, you know what, we don't need these anymore. They're just not necessary. And as the whole starts to become unstable and start to rock more and more, to count how many that you put over here before it actually crashed. But see, I believe that each of us, even in our even though we're similar, we're different. Just like some of those pieces are just a little bit differently sized, so they slide out easier. And we look at ourselves, and sometimes we're like, yeah, I have some little quirks, you know. I'm bald. I weigh a little more than I should. I have to wear glasses. There's things about me but I'm just pretty ordinary. And even as we look at ourselves sometimes, we don't realize that without our presence, without the part that we play, the whole can become unstable. See, I believe that the idea that I kind of want us to focus our thoughts on today is that we each and every one of us are created for a significant purpose. I believe part of that purpose is what God has for us to do in the body of Christ here at Ferrum Faith. But I also believe that part of that is just what He has created us for in the life that we live. Significance is defined, a significant purpose. Significance is defined as the quality of having meaning, the importance of something or someone because of its effects on other things. Another word that we use for this is influence. So when I say that God has created each and every one of us for a significant purpose, I believe that God has created each and every one of us with influence. That there's a purpose, there's a plan, there's a reason that He's made us. And not only that, because sometimes we think about, well, yeah, there's a reason that He made me. But not only that, there's a reason that He has put you in the place where He has placed you. Whether that be here at Ferrum Faith as a part of this body, or in your workplace, or in the family that He's placed you in, or in the social circle that you are in, there is a significant purpose that you fill in each one of those circles of influence. I believe that each and every one of us I got to get rid of some stuff here, I got too much. Have an important part to play in God's plan for this church, for the community that we live in. This is the other thing, for the time and the generation that we live in as well. God could have had Adam Coombs be born 200 years ago if He wished to. He put me in a specific time and generation for a specific purpose. And that goes for each and every one of you as well. Now, part of me wishes that I'd been born in the American West in the cowboy days, because I probably would have lived a short life as a gunslinger. But I know that the purpose and the time that He has placed me is for a reason. Very much like those Jenga pieces played a specific role in a specific place in their part in the whole. We sometimes look and we're like, man, it doesn't look very significant to me from our perspective. But we have to remember that we don't have necessarily the understanding of the significance of the place that God has placed us in the here and now. I can tell you this. I was thinking about this. I was actually debating whether to call my sermon today Foundations of Faith or Made to Matter, and I chose to use the latter. But as I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about Ferrum Faith in particular, and I was thinking about the history of Ferrum Faith, and the people that were influential in being a part of this. As we look back, we look at them and they're like, man, what heroes of faith. But I'm pretty sure from having conversations with different ones of them that I've had the opportunity to talk with, at the point in time when they said, you know what, this is God's plan for this place, it didn't feel to them like they were doing anything too extraordinary. They were just following God's direction. They were doing His thing. That felt like a pretty ordinary, pretty normal thing. And yet, as we look back, there's an extremely significant role that they played in the foundation of this church. And I use this church as an example because it's something easy for us to wrap our minds around. You can even take the idea of a foundation in your house. You can knock a couple of, how many of you have ever seen a stone foundation? You can knock a couple of stones out of a stone foundation, but if you knock enough of them out, the house is going to collapse. And so even though sometimes we look at us and we say, you know what? I don't see that I'm that significant in my time and in the influence in the circles that I run in. There's a reason that God has placed us there. Time grants perspective. Over time, sometimes we learn and we can see, you know what? God did something in and through my life. And that's why I say that each and every one of us is created for a significant purpose. So let's get to Jeremiah chapter 1. We're going to look at verses 4 through 10. And we're going to look at somebody that didn't look much like he had much significance. And we're going to see what God did, or what God called him to do in the place and the part that he played. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you, and this is Jeremiah speaking, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak, for I am too young. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out His hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms, to uproot and tear down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. I'll give you a little bit of information on who Jeremiah exactly was. Jeremiah was not from a particular, he was an Israelite. He was actually from the tribe of Benjamin. And it says that he's a priest. The thing about him that from his perspective, that made him feel like he wasn't that big a deal, he was just pretty ordinary, is he was a priest in the smallest tribe in all of Israel, in a very insignificant town. And so it was kind of like he just, you know what? I just live in Franklin County. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like he was in Jerusalem and a priest at the temple where everything was happening. And a priest was basically, the role of a priest in that day and age was a pastor. It's not something that you would say is an auspicious beginning. And yet it says that the word of the Lord comes to him. And that was the beginning of the most significant time in his life. And I believe that the moment that the word of the Lord comes to us. Now, the word of the Lord coming to him is really just a fancy way of saying that God spoke to his heart. For us today, God speaks to our heart, and then we come to that place where we come to that moment where we say, you know what, Jesus, I choose to honor you and receive you into my life. And so you can almost say that this was that moment in the aha moment in Jeremiah's life. That moment when all of a sudden God speaks to him and something is different. Then it tells us there are 4 things that as this word of the Lord came to him, there are 4 actions, there's 4 things that God does with regard to Jeremiah. And I believe that these 4 things apply not just to Jeremiah, but they apply to us as well. The first thing that he says, he's like, I formed you. He says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is that I formed you. That word literally means to create out of nothing and to take pieces and to make something useful out of it. How many of you remember playing with Legos as a kid? Where's Matt? He's our Lego guy. Okay? This is what I'll tell you. Legos are very different right now than they were when I was a kid. When I was a kid, you bought a box of Legos, you got a box of pieces that did something. But they really didn't tell you what they did. Now you buy a kit of Legos and it builds the Death Star, or it builds the Millennium Falcon, or it builds, right now my son is really wanting Legos for Minecraft Legos, is what they are. They build some Minecraft something or other. In my day, you just got a box of blocks, different shapes and sizes. And you took those miscellaneous pieces and you created something. And that's the picture that God is saying to Jeremiah. He's like, I formed you. I took the pieces that were to be you and I made something specific out of it. But not only that, it says that I knew you. And this speaks to his relationship with him. But not only relationship, but that there was an approval that goes with it in the knowing. It's kind of like us with our parents. There's a certain amount of, in that relationship with our parents, there's a certain amount of approval that goes with it. This helps us become the person that we're going to be in healthy parent-child relationships. There's a certain amount of validation, I guess would be the right word to use, that comes from that relationship. And so he's saying, you know what? Not only do I know you in the sense that, hey, I know who that is, but I validate you by how I have created you. And it talks about having a complete understanding of the inner workings of how you're put together. Now, how many of you drive cars in this room? Now, that should be just about everybody in here. How many of you have a complete understanding of the inner workings of your car? You know your car. When you walk in the parking lot, you don't have to wander around the parking lot and be like, which one of these is mine? At least I hope not. Because if you do, we're going to try to pray for you at the end just to give you some help. We all have been to Walmart before and lost our car, haven't we? Come on. But we know our car, but that doesn't mean we know the inner parts of it, the inner workings, everything that goes into it. Most of you probably can't even tell me what motor. Now, I'm not talking about you, Olin. In your car. You know, there's a lot of us in here that we don't know if it's a 5.4 liter or a 3.4 liter. We know which one it is, but we don't know the inner part of it. And that's what he's talking about here, is that there's a part where God sees everything, the inside. And he knows how we're put together. I knew you. But not only that, he says, I set you apart. That is, there is a purposeful reason for your being. That is, there is intentionality of design in the way that you're put together. There's just not a randomness to it. It's kind of like that whole idea, going back to the idea of building with Legos. If you're going to build something, you have to be intentional about the way you place the blocks, right? Because you're creating it for a specific purpose. I set you apart, purposeful. The big word is design specificity. Isn't that a big word? It's actually 2 words. But design specificity, that is that there is a specific reason for this creation. There's a specific place that it goes in the Jenga stack. And then finally he says, not only did I set you apart, but I appointed you. And that literally means to give someone a mission or a destination. And this is about the time where I hear the Mission Impossible music going in the back of my head. I know. I like guy movies, sorry. You ladies are like, there's a better way to do that. But I appointed you. For you ladies, this is, you give, when you get married, you have a specific lady that you decide is going to be your bridesmaid, right? And then there's one specific lady that's going to be your maid or matron of honor, right? And there's a specific task, a specific person, a reason, a mission that they have in your wedding. But I appointed means to give a mission to, a direction, a destination. There's a specific purpose that you're created for. Now, Jeremiah, his response is a lot like you and me sometimes. He's completely and totally overwhelmed. He says, I'm too young. That literally means I am nothing but a child. Now, Jeremiah wasn't a child. But what he was trying to say is, you know what? There's no way that I can do what you want me to do. And much like us, he makes an excuse. See, the thing is that even in his feeling of inadequacy, he still has to learn to depend on God. There's a saying that goes around that I absolutely despise. And many of you have probably heard this saying before. How many of you have ever heard somebody say that God will never give us more than we can handle? That is not true. Because I can find you lots of instances in Scripture where God gave people stuff to do that was more than they could handle. You see, the reason why I say that's not true is because if we can handle it, why do we need Him? He will not give us anything to do that He hasn't equipped and empowered us to do with His assistance. That is the difference. See, Jeremiah had to learn this lesson just as we do, that we have to depend on Him to succeed, to fulfill the purpose that we were created for. You see, God gives him an important principle for living. If you're going to live significantly, if you're going to live in that significant purpose that God has created us for, He says, don't say I'm too young. You must go everywhere I tell you to go and say everything I tell you to say. The single most simple, basic thing that we need to remember, principle, is that obedience puts us in the place of significance and assures us of His presence to help us even in the face of the thing that we think is bigger than we are. He says to him, just do what I tell you to do and say what I tell you to say. It'll be fine. Because I've created you for this reason. It guarantees us His presence and His power. You see, in order for him to live significantly, the other thing that happened here, if you look in verse 10, is God gave him a picture of his future that was bigger than his present. It tells us in verse 10 where God says to him, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and to tear down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. If we're going to live in line with our significant purpose, we have to have a picture of something that's bigger than our present. We have to have an understanding of what God has called us to. See, I believe that we are each created for significant purpose. So quickly, how do we fulfill that purpose? How do we go about doing that? The first thing that we have to do is we have to connect with our Creator. Just as Jeremiah had that moment where God spoke to him and said, you know what? There's a purpose that I've called you for. We have to have that aha moment where we, first of all, say, you know what, Jesus, I accept your plan for my life. I want you in my life. I give up my right to make decisions for myself, and I want you to be number one in my life. A lot of times we call that salvation. But then beyond that, There's a place that we have to, in this idea of connecting with our Creator, we have to daily spend time with Him, getting to know Him better, and that's that relationship part that God says He created us for. Second thing that we have to do is we have to develop skill with our tools. The Apostle Paul, speaking to his protege Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6, says this, "Fan into flame the gift that's within you." See, part of this whole idea of God creating us for significance is there is tools that He has given us to do the task, right? It's kind of like me as a father. If I tell my son to go mow the yard, I don't give him a pair of scissors to go mow the yard with, unless I really want some entertainment, because it's kind of funny. No, I give him the right tools to work with, don't I? Give him a lawnmower, a weed eater. We do that. We give him the right tools to work the job. God has called us, if we believe truly that He's created us for a significant purpose, for a specific reason, then He's given us a set of tools, and it's up to us to develop skill with our tools. Now, I will say this, my son is still developing skill with his tools mowing. Because there's sometimes when I go out there and it's just, it looks like a slalom course through the yard. And there's spots missed. But as he develops skills with those tools, he gets to the place where he's better, where I can trust him to do more. And the same thing goes for us. We need to develop the skill with the tools that He's given so that we can fulfill the purpose that He created us for. Third thing that we need to do is allow God to position us where He wants to. You see, God didn't let Jeremiah stay in the place where he was. What you find out as you continue to read Jeremiah, Jeremiah ends up in Jerusalem. Jeremiah has some good experiences in Jerusalem, and he has some bad experiences in Jerusalem. He ends up spending a few days in the bottom of a mostly dried up well in mud up to his armpits because somebody didn't like the message from God that he gave. And so even though we're created for a significant purpose, sometimes that significant purpose doesn't guarantee our comfort. It doesn't guarantee that we get to be necessarily in the place where we want to be. Because I guarantee you, Jeremiah didn't be like, when God gave him this vision, you're going to talk to kings and they're going to listen to you. He was probably like, oh yeah, I'm going to go hang out in the palace. I guarantee you the last thing on his mind was, you know what, I'm going to sit in a mud hole up to my armpits for a few days with nothing to eat other than something that somebody throws down into the mud hole. It was a little gritty. But this is what I'll tell you, that even in being in places where, now that's not to say that it's always, when in fulfilling the purpose God created for us, the place, the place where He's put us, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be tough. There's lots of times when it's just plain pure joy. But we have to be willing to take both sides of it as well. And this is what I will say, whether it's in the mud pit or in the aspects of pure joy, either place, we will feel more fulfilled than any other time in our life because we are fulfilling the purpose that we are created for. Finally, the last thing that we have to do is be empowered by His Spirit. This is what I know. The will of God will never take us where His Spirit can't sustain us. And this goes along with that whole idea that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. That there's nothing, the purpose, His purpose for us, as His Spirit strengthens and empowers us, it gives us the ability to do what, when we look in the mirror and we look at ourselves and we say, you know what, I'm just pretty ordinary, I just look like every other piece. What we find out is that really we're not so much like Jenga pieces as much as we're like a bunch of those stones that are showing up there in that foundation in the picture. That each of us, if you look at those stones up there, I'll guarantee you any one of those stones is the same. That each one of those is just a little bit different. And if you take one out of one place and try to stick it in the other place, it ain't going to fit. And so what we may look at ourselves and we may be thinking, oh, we're just a Jenga piece. And even though the Jenga pieces are important, even more so, as we begin to understand the place that He's put us and begin to live for that significant purpose that He's created us for, there's no one else that's going to fit and fill the spot that He's created us for. The other thing that, for me in this whole thing, is as we look at that idea that we are all stones in the foundation, Jesus being the chief cornerstone, that it's God's Spirit And that's why the empowering of His Spirit is so essential. His Spirit is what binds us all together. He's like the mortar in that foundation. He is what keeps us and pulls us all together. Imagine what God could do in you, through you, for you, as you allow Him to use you in the significant purpose that He's created you for. Let's all close in prayer. Father God, we thank you so much for your word to us this morning. We thank you that as we look at this idea, the building a foundation and the pieces and the parts, I pray, God, that we'd help us to recognize that even though we may look at ourselves in the mirror and just think, hey, we're just ordinary like every other piece, God, that you have a specific design, a specific intention, a specific plan for what you want to do for us. And that includes in this church family, that includes in our workplace, it includes in our social circles, it includes this time and generation in which you've placed us. I pray, God, that we would be willing and listening to your voice. I pray that we would connect with you in a way that allows us to hear your voice. I pray that we would develop skills with our tools and allow you to position us in the place that you want us to so that we know that we fit exactly right. But also that we would be empowered by your Spirit. We thank you for it. In Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said...